She flinched at my question, her fingers tightening around the phone. She didn't answer right away, and that silence. It was worse than if she had just blurted out the truth. Because now, I knew she was deciding how much of it to tell me, how much she could get away with. How long, Emily? I repeated, my voice sharper this time. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, I thought she was going to lie. But then she exhaled, shaky and uneven. It's not what you think, she whispered. I let out a hollow laugh, the kind that doesn't hold any humor, just exhaustion. Not what I think. Because what I think, Emily, is that my wife is getting messages from some guy named Dylan about how much fun he had last night. I gestured to the phone in her hand. So, please enlighten me. What exactly am I supposed to think? She looked away, jaw clenched, like she was trying to hold something back. Guilt? Anger? Regret? I wasn't sure. I met him a few weeks ago, she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A few weeks. The words sank into my gut like a lead weight. While I had been coming home every night, kissing her, trusting her, she had been sneaking around with someone else. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. Where? How? She hesitated. At a coffee shop, she said, rubbing her arms like she was suddenly cold. It was innocent at first. Just small talk. But then, she trailed off, shaking her head. But then what? I pushed. She swallowed, gripping the phone like it was her last lifeline. It just happened. That phrase. I had heard it before. The coward's excuse. I stepped forward, just enough that she had to meet my eyes. No, Emily. Things like this don't just happen. You don't accidentally end up on Tinder. You don't accidentally go out with someone behind your husband's back. So tell me, how exactly did this just happen? She blinked rapidly, her breath coming quicker. I don't know, she murmured, shaking her head. I was feeling off, disconnected. You've been so busy with work and I cut her off with a bitter scoff. Oh, so this is my fault now. Her face twisted with frustration. No, that's not what I'm saying. I was lonely, okay. Lonely. I'd spent the past year working my ass off to give us a life most people would dream of. Every meeting, every late night, every weekend I sacrificed, it was all for us. And now, standing here, hearing this, it felt like a cruel joke. And what? Dylan was just filling that void? I asked, my voice ice. Her eyes watered, and she bit her lip like she was trying to hold back tears. I didn't sleep with him, she said quickly, like that might erase everything. I swear. We talked, we had coffee, we met up at night. I interrupted, my anger bubbling over. Went on dates? Lied to me? Hid things. Her silence was answer enough. I shook my head, stepping back, because if I stood too close, I wasn't sure what I'd do. Not physically. I'd never hurt her. But I might say something I couldn't take back. I trusted you. I said, my voice raw. I came home every night thinking we were solid. That even if things weren't perfect, at least we were still in this together. And the whole time, you were out. What? Playing pretend? Seeing how it felt to be single again. Tears streamed down her face now, but I felt nothing. Just numbness. It was never about replacing you, she said, her voice cracking. It was stupid. I know that. But it wasn't about wanting someone else. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Then what the hell was it about, Emily? She hesitated, just for a second, but that was all I needed. You were thinking about it, I said, my voice suddenly quieter. You might not have slept with him yet, but you were considering it, weren't you? She didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the weight of it settle in. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just an emotional lapse. She had been standing on the edge, looking over. And now, she was only sorry because I had caught her before she could jump. I let out a slow, heavy breath, then turned away. I can't do this right now. Jason. I ignored her and grabbed my keys. My head was pounding, my thoughts racing too fast to make sense of. I needed air. I needed to get away from the lavender-scented house that suddenly felt like a stranger's home. The last thing I saw before I walked out was Emily, standing in the middle of the kitchen, her face streaked with tears. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't care. She sniffled, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater, but I wasn't moved. I wasn't going to let her tears soften the reality of what she had done. The trust we had, the life we built, it was all shattered now, and no amount of crying was going to change that. Start from the beginning, I demanded. Every detail. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she just stared at the floor like she was searching for a way out of this conversation. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. She took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly. I was bored, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I started swiping just for fun. Just to see. I scoffed. Just to see what? What it would be like to throw everything away. She flinched, but didn't argue. It wasn't supposed to be serious. I never thought I'd actually meet anyone. But then I matched with Dylan, and he made me feel noticed. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I felt like I mattered again. I shook my head, biting back the anger bubbling in my chest. So, I work my ass off every day to give us a life. And you're out here looking for attention from some stranger online? It wasn't like that, she insisted. Then explain it to me, I shot back. Because right now, it sure as hell looks like that. She wiped at her face again, but I could see she was unraveling. At first, it was just texting, she admitted. Flirty, but nothing serious. I thought it was harmless, I swear. But then he asked me to meet him for coffee, and I told myself it was still innocent. Just a conversation. And then what? I asked, my voice hollow. She hesitated, her lips pressing together like she was debating how much to tell me. Don't lie, I warned. She took another shaky breath. We met a few times. Just talking. But then it got physical. My stomach turned. Even though I had known, deep down, I had known the moment I saw that message. Hearing her say it out loud was different. It was real now. How many times? My voice was eerily calm. She hesitated. How many, Emily? 3, she whispered. I clenched my jaw, my hands curling in a fist at my sides. 3. 3 separate times she had gone to him, let him touch her, let him have what was supposed to be mine. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep myself from breaking something. Where? She hesitated again. Where, Emily? She looked away, ashamed. A hotel. Of course. A hotel. Neutral ground. A place where no one would recognize her, where she could pretend she wasn't married, pretend she wasn't betraying me. I nodded slowly, my jaw so tight it hurt. So, let me get this straight. You met a guy on Tinder, texted him for weeks, met up for coffee, and then slept with him 3 times in a hotel. Did I miss anything? Tears streamed down her face, and she shook her head. No, that's everything. I ran a hand down my face, exhaustion settling into my bones. Were you ever going to tell me? She hesitated. That was all the answer I needed. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So what was the plan, Emily? Keep sneaking around until you got bored? Or were you just waiting until I found out, so you wouldn't have to make a decision? I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I wasn't thinking, Jason. I wasn't thinking about anything except yourself. I finished for her. She didn't argue. She couldn't. I turned away, pacing the room, because if I stayed still, I might lose whatever control I had left. My mind raced, trying to process everything she had just said, everything she had done. The betrayal, the deception, the sheer selfishness of it all. And the worst part? I still loved her. I hated her for what she had done, but I still loved her. And that was the part that hurt the most. I turned back to her, forcing myself to meet her eyes. I don't know what to do with this, Emily, I admitted. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Her face crumpled, and she took a step forward, but I backed away. Jason, please. I'll do anything. I'll delete my accounts. I'll go to therapy. I held up a hand, cutting her off. I don't need promises right now. I need time. Her lip trembled, but she nodded. I grabbed my keys off the counter, my mind screaming for escape. I need air. Are you coming back? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer, because I honestly didn't know. And as I walked out the door, the only thing I knew for certain was that nothing between us would ever be the same again. The weight of the night before pressed down on me like a boulder. I had barely slept, tossing and turning on the couch, my mind replaying every word she said, every excuse, every pathetic justification. No matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, nothing made sense. Nothing excused what she had done. Emily moved around the kitchen quietly, her presence barely noticeable. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something. Anything, but I had nothing left to give her. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to speak to her yet. She finally broke the silence. "I made breakfast," she said, her voice soft, hesitant. "I know you probably do not want to eat, but I thought." I cut her off with a humorless laugh. "You think making me breakfast is going to fix this?" I turned my head to look at her. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "Do you really believe that some scrambled eggs and coffee are going to make me forget that you spent 2 months sneaking around behind my back?" She flinched, gripping the counter like she needed the support. "I do not know what else to do, Jason. I do not know how to make this right." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "That is the problem, isn't it? You cannot make it right. You cannot undo what you did. And no matter how sorry you are, no matter how much you cry or beg, it does not change the fact that you made a choice." She swallowed hard, tears welling up again. "I know, but I still love you. That has not changed." I shook my head, my jaw tightening. "That is the thing, Emily. Love is not supposed to feel like this. It is not supposed to come with secrets and betrayal. You say you love me, but you sure as hell did not act like it when you were with him." She wiped her face with shaking hands. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my hands over my face. I had thought about it all night. Thought about throwing her out, telling her to pack her things and get the hell out of my life. But something inside me stopped me from saying the words. Maybe it was because I was not ready to let go completely, or maybe it was because I wanted her to sit in this mess she created and feel every bit of it. "I do not know what I want," I admitted. "I do not know if I can ever look at you the same way again." She nodded slowly, her fingers twisting the fabric of her sweater. "I will stay at my sister's for a while," she said finally. "Give you space." I did not stop her. I did not tell her to stay or to go. I just sat there, watching as she turned and walked upstairs to pack a bag. A few minutes later, she came back down, her suitcase rolling behind her. She paused at the door, looking back at me with eyes full of regret. "I will do whatever it takes, Jason. Whatever you need me to do." I did not respond. I just watched as she opened the door and stepped out, leaving behind the broken pieces of what used to be our life. The door clicked shut, and for the first time since I found that message, I was alone with my thoughts. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt some kind of clarity now that she was gone. But all I felt was exhaustion. I stared down at the table, at the untouched plate of food she made, and let out a long, slow breath. The silence in the house was deafening. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, mirroring the void in my chest. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The night air seeped through the cracks in the window, but it did nothing to cool the anger burning inside me. I pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of town, parking beneath the fluorescent glow of the overhead lights. I wasn't out of gas, but I needed a moment to breathe, to think, to exist without the weight of her betrayal suffocating me. I stepped out of the car and leaned against the hood, staring up at the sky. The stars were faint, barely visible against the glow of the city behind me. It was quiet out here, the only sounds coming from the occasional car passing by and the hum of the neon sign flickering above the station. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. A few missed calls, a couple of unread messages, all from her. I didn't open them. I wasn't ready to hear whatever she had to say. Not yet. The thought of going back home made my stomach twist. The idea of walking through that door, of facing her again, of pretending that we could somehow navigate this mess. It was too much. But at the same time, what was I supposed to do? Just leave? Throw away everything we had built because of one mistake? No, it wasn't one mistake. It was months of lies. It was secrecy and deception, and now it was my burden to carry. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I had the strength to fix what she had broken. But I did know one thing. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Sliding back into the driver's seat, I started the engine and pulled back onto the road. I still didn't know where I was going. But for now, anywhere was better than home. She stood up, gripping the blanket around her like it could shield her from the weight of her own choices. I don't know, she admitted, voice shaking. I just know that I have to try. I scoffed, shaking my head. Trying would have been telling me the truth before I found out like this. Trying would have been coming to me when you felt invisible instead of running to someone else. I was scared, she said, stepping closer, her eyes pleading. Scared that if I told you how I felt, you'd stop loving me. I let out a bitter laugh. And yet, here we are. You kept your secret. You lied. You cheated. And now I am the one questioning whether I can love you the same way again. Her breath caught in her throat, and for the first time that night, I saw true terror in her eyes. Not just regret, not just shame, but fear. Because now, for the first time, she understood that this might be the moment she truly lost me. The silence between us stretched long and suffocating. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Some kind of miracle? Some answer that would make this all make sense? There was none. Only the hollow truth that no matter what came next, things would never go back to the way they were. Finally, I exhaled and rubbed my temples, exhausted from everything. I am staying in the guest room tonight, I said, my voice drained of all emotion. Tomorrow, we will talk about what happens next. She nodded weakly, biting her lip to keep from crying again. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not tonight. Not after everything. I grabbed my phone off the counter and walked out of the kitchen, feeling the weight of her gaze on my back. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. Upstairs, the guest room felt foreign. The bed was smaller, the air colder. It wasn't home. But then again, neither was the life I had walked away from downstairs. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the phone in my hand. I could text someone, my brother, an old friend, just to feel like I wasn't drowning alone in this. But I didn't. Instead, I set the phone down, leaned back against the headboard, and let the darkness of the room swallow me whole. Sleep didn't come easy. My thoughts played on a loop, replaying everything she had said, every excuse, every admission. And underneath all of it, one question remained. Could I ever forgive her? I didn't know. And maybe, just maybe, that was the answer I was too afraid to face. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, as if she was trying to wake from a bad dream. What did he tell you? She repeated, her voice cautious, like she already knew the answer but was afraid to hear it aloud. I studied her face, the exhaustion written in the creases around her eyes, the way her lips trembled as she waited for me to speak. A part of me wanted to tell her that nothing he said mattered, that I had already made up my mind. But the truth was his words had shaken something loose inside me, something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He told me you were lost, I said finally, that you felt like you weren't the same woman I fell in love with, and you were scared I wouldn't love the person you had become. Her breath caught, and she looked away, blinking rapidly. He said that. I nodded, and that you tried to end things with him weeks ago. She let out a shaky sigh, pressing a hand to her forehead. It's true, she whispered. I wanted to stop. I knew it was wrong, and I hated myself for it, but I didn't know how to fix what I had already broken. I sat there for a long moment, just watching her. Why didn't you talk to me? I asked. Why didn't you come to me instead of running to him? She swallowed hard. Because I was afraid that if I told you how much I had changed, how much I felt like a different person, you'd realize you didn't love me anymore. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So instead, you made the choice for me. You went out and did the one thing that almost guaranteed I wouldn't love you the same way. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't try to wipe them away this time. I know, she whispered. I know I ruined everything, and I can't take it back. But I swear to you, I never stopped loving you. I exhaled slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Love isn't just a feeling, Sarah, I said, my voice softer now. It's a choice. Every single day, we choose to love each other. And you chose something else. She sobbed into her hands, her whole body shaking. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt tired. I do not know where we go from here, I admitted. I do not know if I can ever trust you again. But if you are serious about fixing this, it is going to take more than just words. She looked up, desperation shining in her eyes. I will do whatever it takes. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Then here is what is going to happen. You're going to cut off all contact with him. No more messages, no more meetings, no more excuses. And I want proof. I want to see you block his number, delete the app, everything." She nodded quickly. "Done." And after that, I continued, we go to counseling. Together. Her lips parted slightly, like she hadn't expected me to give her a path forward. You are willing to try?" I ran a hand through my hair. "I'm willing to see if there is anything left to save." Relief flooded her face, but I held up a hand before she could say anything. "But I'm not making any promises. And if I feel like this is not working, I walk away." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand." The silence between us stretched again, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was fragile, delicate, like something that could break at any moment. I stood up from the bed, looking down at her one last time. "Tomorrow, we start figuring this out," I said. "But for now, I need space." She wiped her face and nodded. "Okay." I turned and walked out, heading back to the guest room. As I shut the door behind me, I let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like forever. I didn't know if we would make it. I didn't know if I even wanted to. But for now, for tonight, I was willing to take one small step toward the possibility. And that was more than I thought I could give. The days that followed were slow, heavy, and filled with silence that carried more weight than any argument ever could. Sarah did everything she could to show me she was serious. She deleted everything, blocked Dylan's number right in front of me, even offered to let me go through her phone whenever I wanted. But none of it changed the fact that the damage was already done. I had always believed that trust, once broken, could never be put back together the same way. It might be repaired, but the cracks would always be visible. And as much as I wanted to believe we could get past this, I couldn't ignore the part of me that still felt like I was standing on shaky ground. The first counseling session was brutal. Sitting in that stiff office chair, across from a man whose job was to dissect the worst parts of our marriage, I felt more exposed than I ever had before. Sarah sat next to me, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes downcast like a guilty child waiting for punishment. "So, tell me why we are here," the therapist, Dr. Collins, asked. I let out a bitter laugh. "We are here because my wife decided to go looking for something outside our marriage." Sarah winced at my words, but I didn't soften them. "I wasn't here to make her feel better." Dr. Collins nodded, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, can you tell me why?" She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her jeans. "I felt disconnected," she admitted. "From him, from myself. I felt like I was just going through the motions of being a wife, and I didn't recognize who I was anymore. And instead of talking to me about it, you went to someone else," I said, my voice low. She turned to face me, her eyes pleading. "I didn't plan for it to happen, I swear. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I wasn't looking for an affair. It just happened." I finished for her, shaking my head. "That is the part one will never understand. You say it was not about him, that it could have been anyone. So why not me?" Her breath hitched, and for the first time, I saw a different kind of pain in her expression. "Because I was afraid you wouldn't want to hear it," she said softly. "Because I thought if I told you how lost I felt, you would look at me like I was broken." I scoffed. "Well, congratulations. Now I do." Dr. Collins held up a hand, stepping in before things escalated. "I think it is important to acknowledge that both of you are in pain," he said. "This kind of betrayal does not come from nowhere. Sarah, you say you felt lost. When did that start?" She hesitated. "A year ago, maybe longer. A year. Longer." My stomach twisted. "So, all that time, you were pretending everything was fine?" She swallowed hard. "I thought it would pass. I thought if I just pushed through, I would feel normal again. But I didn't. And then, Dylan happened. Dylan happened," I repeated, shaking my head. "Like a storm you had no control over." She looked down at her lap, ashamed. "No," she admitted. "I had control, and I made the wrong choice." For the rest of the session, Dr. Collins guided us through the wreckage, asking the questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. Why had she not come to me? What had she been looking for? Did she regret it? Did she still love me? That last one lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Of course I still love you," she whispered. I never stopped, but love wasn't enough. Not anymore. When the session ended, we drove home in silence. She reached for my hand once, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe I never would be. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing she was just down the hall. Sometimes I caught myself missing the way things used to be, the easy way she fit against me in sleep, the way her breath evened out when she drifted off. But then the memories would creep back in, and I'd turn over, pressing my face into the pillow, trying to push them away. One night, she knocked on my door. I didn't answer at first, hoping she'd take the hint. But she didn't. "I know you were still awake," she said softly. I just wanted to say goodnight. I stared at the darkened ceiling, my throat tight. "Good night, Sarah." Her footsteps faded, and I exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure where we were headed. Maybe this was the beginning of rebuilding. Or maybe it was just the slow realization that some things, no matter how much you want them to, can never go back to the way they were. But I was still here. And for now, that was enough.